started, I also wanted to thank Maryville University. It was really great of them to host this event. It's a nice forum. And I also want to thank our different speakers that are going to be here today. I just wanted to comment a little bit on the format of what we're trying to do. Last week I did a telephone town hall forum. We did about 95% of 2 hours and 15 minutes was all on answering questions. This particular gathering is a freedom conference. It's not about answering questions. It's about the fact that we're going to try to give you an executive presentation on a couple of pieces of legislation that deeply affect every single American's life. So that's what this is about. I don't mind answering questions. I said KFOX a few minutes ago, answering questions. Okay, I'm trying to save you time, and I think we can do a better job by just running through what's going on with 2 different pieces of legislation. Now, so that's the whole idea of the format. We've got, as you can see, we have 4 panelists, so we're going to do 2 subjects. The first subject is and then we're going to do the cap and tax. There were some other names for cap and tax and rhyme with cap. But anyway, this is something that occurred in June work. And then after the cap and tax, the focus moved over to the socialized medicine or the government takeover of healthcare and all of that. So we're going to do it in that order. So we have 2 of our panelists that are going to deal with, first of all, the tax part, the global warming piece, and that legislation, the tremendous intrusiveness of that legislation into our lives. And then we're going to get into the healthcare piece over with our second set of panels. And so I also have here some charts. I want to just give you a little bit of a word of how the charts came to be and what's happened in the last couple of months. In fact, my last 7 months, it seems like every day has been Halloween. Each day seems to be scarier and scarier than the next. And we've seen all kinds of different proposals being sort of the cans of worms that are open in Washington, D.C. But fortunately, and I can say I'm a lot more cheerful right now than I was about 6 months ago, that there has been an overreach. And these proposals are so grandiose and so tremendous levels of government involvement in each of these areas that there's been a reaction, as you know, in the homeland across America. This particular meeting, in a way, is a little bit unique. Different people from Washington, D.C. have come back to their districts and had town hall meetings, and they almost got lynched. And so the people are so But the point is, people were really upset at some of this legislation, and with very good reason they were upset. And to the point where the people who were going home from God, we were told that the Democrats were going to have no town hall meetings, that they were advised by Nancy Pelosi not to have any at all. And our leadership, the Republican leadership, told us, you better think twice if you have any kind of a town or public gathering, because there's people out there that are really mad. And I thought, yeah, that's like me. I'm really mad too. I don't like what's going on. And so we decided, we don't have anything to hide. I've been voting no a long time, starting way back with No Child Left Behind. That was a Republican proposal. It was a huge expense against Medicare expansion because we couldn't afford that. The Wall Street bailout, you name it, any of these bailouts, the car company bailouts, or the clunker bailout, or whatever you want to be. I just been voting against that because I just don't think it's the place of federal government. But anyway, that's kind of the tone of what's going on. So people are kind of afraid to have these meetings. And there's some reason for that. That leads us into the first piece of legislation that I wanted to talk to you about today. And that was what's called cap and trade. I don't know where they got the cap and trade concept. It's really a huge tax increase. And the excuse of this piece of legislation was that CO2 is really, really bad. I hope that you've enjoyed the global warming that we've had here in St. Louis. The concept behind the global warming involves a fair amount of science. As an engineer, I'm not afraid of that particularly, but it also has a tremendous number of assumptions built into that entire area. And we have some experts that may want to talk about that. I'm going to only brush it over fairly quickly and say, let's assume for just a minute that we had weathermen that were so accurate that they could tell you exactly what the weather was going to be in 6 weeks from now. or in a year from now, or 2 years, and what was going to happen with the CO2, which there's not much argument that mankind does release more CO2 because we're burning a lot of coal. But let's assume that those people were right and that the CO2 was going to heat things up, and so CO2 is a problem. Let's grant all of that, which I don't believe that that's all true. There's pieces of it that are and pieces that aren't. But let's just assume that on the face of it, that what was the excuse for the bill was CO2. Aside from don't pop the lid on the Coke because those little bubbles are deadly, you know. Aside from that, what does this legislation do? Well, if you were genuine, I believe, if you were honest as a political leader, and you think CO2 is a big problem, and you take a look and you say, we don't have any way to make China or India comply with any CO2 legislation anyway, but we want to be a good example as Americans. We want to set a good example. We want to reduce our amount of CO2. Perhaps a reasonable goal to take would be to get rid of 98% of the CO2 created by automobiles in this country. Would that be a reasonable thing to take on as a project politically? If CO2 is so bad, how about if we got rid of 98% of the CO2 produced by automobiles in America? Well, if we're going to do that, how would you go about doing it? Well, it's really pretty simple, and you don't need a 1,400-page bill to do it. You see, what you simply do is, America currently creates just under 20% of our electricity using nuclear power. If you, and France, I was just in France looking at their nuclear reprocessing of fuel. France generates 80% of its electricity from nuclear. If we were to go from America's 20%, and we went to 40% nuclear in America, over a period of time, the new power plants put in nuclear as opposed to coal-fired. And so we went from 20 to 40% nuclear. That would basically get rid of all of the emissions. In terms of the amount of CO2, it would be the same thing as getting rid of